Hello. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the Extrude tool. Now, this tool is probably the one I use the very most out of all the modeling tools. In order to demonstrate this, I'm going to start by creating a cube at the origin and scaling it up. Now, like most tools in Maya, there are a bunch of different ways to be able to access this. The first is by coming up to the File menu and making sure that you're in modeling mode as opposed to like animation or something else. You can come up here to Edit Mesh, Extrude. And so I'm going to do that right now. And right now I'm showing you that there's an issue. I had it selected in object mode when I extruded, and this is what happened. It created this secondary shape. So selecting the object in extruding is generally not the best way to use this tool. This tool is more specifically designed to be used with components. So with this in mind, I can do the same thing, and I'm going to grab that face there. I can come up to Edit Mesh, Extrude, and by the way, next to Extrude you can see the hotkeys, Control E. So if you ever want to just use the hotkeys, you can do Control E and that will have the same function. But I can extrude and pull this up. Now the next thing I want to show you is the manipulator tool. I spoke about this briefly when I was talking about the tools in Module 1, but the manipulator tool really comes into play when I use something like Extrude. The manipulator tool combines all of these other tools. So if I hit the W key, that's move, rotate, scale with the E and R key. But if I hit the T key and go back to that manipulator tool, it has all three. So once again, shape and color have a big influence on what's happening here in Maya. They help to show a reflection of what mode you're in. So if I grab one of these handles to move, and I'll Control Z to step that back, the center of this is that square, and that shows that I am in move mode. If I grab one of these cubes, the center changes to a cube, representing that I am now in scale mode. And I can use these to go back and forth, I can scale up and down. If I grab this outside ring, that puts me into rotation mode. And so you can see this is a very handy tool that I can use to be able to manipulate and adjust an object. Another thing I want to point out is the fact that the manipulator tool is working in component space. Now what that means is that when the component moves, the manipulator tool stays and reflects that. So when I go into move mode, I continue to move in that single direction. Now there are other ways that this can be done as well with the other tools. So let me switch to one of the other tools. So like move. As I move and then I rotate and I go back to move, you see that it's still in world mode. It's still saying, hey, that's up. It doesn't take into account the current direction of that component. A way to access this is either you can reach it under the tool settings, or the way that's probably a little bit more effective now with the new tool sets is to come under the modeling toolkit. So clicking on this button here on the top right to open up the modeling toolkit. And under the move settings where it says world right now, I can actually change that and move it to component. And now you see that it takes into account that component's rotation. And then I can take that back to world mode. So that's the manipulator tool. Once again, can be very, very useful. But let me show you again. I'm going to actually Control Z, step back to here. Some other ways to use the Extrude tool. So another place to find the Extrude tool, in addition to this file menu, is to come under the modeling shelf, which is right here. And this icon here, which you saw under this thing, the Edit Mesh Extrude, you see that icon next to it. That same icon is represented right here. If I highlight over the top, it will say Extrude to show me that that's what it is. So if I hit Extrude again, I can scale that down. And then another location for it is under this modeling toolkit. I can come down here to the components and select Extrude. And once more, I can pull that up. And you can see very quickly I'm starting to generate shapes. Now I'm going to introduce you to some of the other components that I showed you a little bit earlier. But if I come here and select an edge and do an extrusion, this creates a problem. Now you may not be able to notice the problem right away because it looks like everything's fine. It's like, yeah, I just extrude that edge, that'll work great. But geometry in Maya is one-sided. What that means is there really is just one side that will be reflected. So the way to show this is if I come under shading, right here, shading, and I turn on backface culling, you'll notice that the face on the other side disappears. Many of you may have seen this before when you've been playing a video game or something and the camera clips through the wall and suddenly you can see through the wall. This is why. Geometric faces or polygon faces are one-sided. Now I'm going to turn backface culling off and I'm going to Control Z to undo that. So the way we would create a thin shape like that is actually to generate additional geometry. The way I can do that is by selecting all of these faces and selecting Extrude, and I can pull those up even if just a little bit, and it creates that shape. If I need to make this a little bit smaller or get it to line up better, I can extrude this out, or not extrude out, scale that out, and then I can actually grab that entire face and do an extrusion. That way I have that thinner form that I wanted, but it's not going to be one-sided. I've actually got geometry there, and that way it'll create this much cleaner structure. The other thing I want to point out is if I try extruding a vertice, this is going to present some new issues as well. When I extrude a vertice, this creates something known as an n-gon. An n-gon is a polygon with more than 4 sides. So in this case you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. And this is geometry that is not very clean. Also, it's creating triangles. Now triangles in and of themselves are not bad. Many models use triangles. There are certain times where they can be very efficient. But for right now in the modeling process, to help you understand clean modeling processes and good topology and workflow, I want to encourage you to use just quads. So just 4-sided faces with everything that you do. There's a few reasons for this. One is because as you improve and advance into more advanced modeling techniques and skills, especially when you get into sculpting and creating things like normal maps, it's important to have that clean topology and clean edge loops. To explain what an edge loop is, I can come down here, and by selecting edge, you see that that's one edge. If I double click on an edge, it will select all of the edges in a circle or within that loop. I can do the same thing here, and you'll see it doesn't go all the way through because there's that quad at the top where it ends. But this is what's known as an edge loop. And these become very important when you're modeling and trying to be efficient. So for right now, be aware of what these do and that there are times and places to have things like triangles in your geometry. But for cleanliness sake and to get you into good practices and habits early, I encourage you to keep with quads, and when you use the Extrude tool, make sure you are only extruding faces, not the entire object or edges or vertices, because that will introduce problems. Now the next thing I want to talk about is an issue that comes up very, very often when people begin using this tool. And that is when you do something like, whoop, I accidentally double clicked that, when you accidentally click on the Extrude tool twice. And this is another reason why I encourage you to have the face handles turned on, because if they're not turned on, you may not even notice that there's an issue. This looks clean. It looks like everything's 4-sided and it should be good. But as soon as I turn on the face, you'll notice that there are these handles that are right here in the center of an edge. Now a handle for a face should not be in the center of an edge. By grabbing these faces and pulling those out, you'll see what the issue actually was. So let me do this a little more slowly on this side. When I click on this the first time, those face handles are in the edge because the face has not been pulled out. The edges have not been separated. So I'll stay there. And if you accidentally click it again and then pull out that second face, it leaves geometry. Now there are a lot of different ways to clean this up because this can actually present many issues down the road. But I'm going to show you two approaches right now. So I will select this and do a few different extrusions to show. The first is that if you are in face mode and you have the face handles turned on, if you pull something out and notice that there's a face left there, just do Control-Z a few times to step back to make sure that it's clean and do the extrusion again. That way it'll clean it up. If you happen to miss it, so for example, you extrude a few times, whoop, and if you double click really fast, it pulls up the tool options. But if you extrude a few times and you go, oh, well, that's a problem, after you've already actually gone in and created a different shape, then what you can do is either pull it out by grabbing these faces and pulling them forward, or simply by grabbing the edge loop that I talked about a second ago, where you double click and you can pull it, and if you see this, that means you're pulling it the wrong direction. So it's basically overlapping its own shape. This is something known as Z-tearing, and it's a sign that the faces are overlapping and there may be an issue. So I can pull that back, and I can keep looking until I find that there's none left. I hit the Extrude tool a few times. Step back that last one, and then to remove these, I simply double click that edge loop and delete. Double click, delete, double click, delete, double click, delete, or backspace is what I was clicking on. Which seems to make this look good, but this is going to create another issue. If I go to vertex, you'll notice that the vertices after I delete the edges are still there. And so this creates, once again, n-gons, which are a problem. So now this is a polygon face with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides, and this one has even more. So the way I resolve this is by selecting all of these vertices and hitting the backspace key to remove them. And now I've got clean geometry. I don't have any n-gons, I don't have any faces, and once again I can go to face to double check, make sure there's no handles on the edges that are problematic. I don't have any polygonal faces that are missing their backside. Everything's in that 3D space. And so this is an object that can be cleaned. So I want to go through the cleanup process with you once again. So if I select this object, right now it's still at the origin. And so that works for me. But I want to come up under the attribute editor, and I will begin by naming the object. So I will call this funny cube mesh. Hit enter, and you notice that updated this mesh shape. And last time when I was showing you this in module 1, I only had a few extra tabs. Because of this modeling process, I now have a lot of extra tabs. This is the history of the object. And if I go in and start tweaking stuff, for example, if I come all the way down here at the end and find that polycube, this was the initial settings. If I try and change these settings now after getting all that other history, you see that it will jumble it up and cause problems. Enough so that it just crashed. So I'm going to pause it and bring it back. All right. So I just came back. I had to redo the funny cube in some way, shape, or form to be able to continue showing this, but you see what an issue having that history on there and then making changes to it can cause. So let me start again by once again naming this. So funny cube mesh. And in order to get rid of all this extra history on here that's going to end up causing it to break, I'm going to go to Edit, Delete All by Type, History. And now it brings this down just to the two tabs, the transform and the mesh, as well as the initial shading group and the Lambert. Once again, for right now, don't worry too much about these. Just be aware that later on we will be cleaning those up and changing them. Now, the other issue I still have is that if I change that scale back to 1, 1, 1, it's not going to be where I want it to be. If you remember, I scaled up that cube at the beginning, and I want that to be its default size. So to fix that, after I delete the history, I go Modify, Freeze Transformations. And for this, you have to make sure that the object is selected. If the object is not selected, and I go Modify, Freeze Transforms, it just brings up a warning and says, hey, there's nothing specified. We don't know what you want to do it to. So I select the object, modify, freeze transforms, and that way it tells Maya that this is its default state, that this is its position, that's its scale, the history's gone, so this is the default state for this object. I also want to go into the Windows Outliner to double check that and make sure that everything is cleaned up. Close that. And then I can go and save this scene. So File, Save Scene As, Funny Cube, and I will save. So with that, you've now been introduced to the Extrude tool. I encourage you to take some time right now and just play with it. Doesn't matter how bad you mess things up. Try grabbing multiple faces, try separating faces, try pulling different components out. Even if you know it's breaking the geometry, it doesn't matter right now. Just have fun and explore. The more time you put in practicing and playing with it, the better off you're going to be down the road.